The Gobi is a large desert region in Asia. It covers parts of northern and northwestern China, and of southern Mongolia. The desert basins of the Gobi are bounded by the Altai Mountains and the grasslands and steppes of Mongolia on the north, by the Taklamakan Desert to the west, by the Hexi corridor and Tibetan Plateau to the southwest, and by the North China Plain to the southeast. The Gobi is most notable in history as part of the Great Mongol Empire, and as the location of several important cities along the Silk Road. The Gobi is a rain-shadow desert, formed by the Himalayan mountain range blocking rain-carrying clouds from the Indian Ocean reaching the Gobi Territory. Geography. The Gobi measures over 1,600 kilometers from southwest to northeast and 800 kilometers from north to south. The desert is widest in the west, along the line joining the Lake Boston and the Lopnor. It occupies an arc of land 1,295,000 square kilometers in area as of 2007. It is the fifth largest desert in the world and Asia's largest. Much of the Gobi is not sandy but has exposed bare rock. The Gobi has several different Chinese names, including and. In its broadest definition, the Gobi includes the long stretch of desert and semi-desert area extending from the foot of the Pamirs, 77 degrees east, to the Greater Khingan Mountains, 116 degrees to 118 degrees east, on the border of Manchuria, and from the foothills of the Altai, Sayan, and Yablonoi mountain ranges on the north to the Kunlun, Altan and Kilian mountain ranges, which form the northern edges of the Tibetan Plateau on the south. A relatively large area on the east side of the Greater Khingan Range, between the upper waters of the Songhua and the upper waters of the Liaoho, is reckoned to belong to the Gobi by conventional usage. Some geographers and ecologists prefer to regard the western area of the Gobi region, the basin of the Tarim in Xinjiang and the desert basin of Lopnor and Hami, as forming a separate and independent desert, called the Taklamakan Desert. Archaeologists and paleontologists have done excavations in the Nemak Basin in the northwestern part of the Gobi Desert, which is noted for its fossil treasures, including early mammals, dinosaur eggs, and prehistoric stone implements, some 100,000 years old. Climate. The Gobi is a cold desert with frost and occasionally snow occurring on its dunes. Besides being quite far north, it is also located on a plateau roughly 910–1,520 meters above sea level, which contributes to its low temperatures. An average of approximately 194 millimeters of rain falls annually in the Gobi. Additional moisture reaches parts of the Gobi in winter as snow is blown by the wind from the Siberian steppes. These winds cause the Gobi to reach extremes of temperature ranging from -40 degrees Celsius in winter to +50 degrees Celsius in summer. The climate of the Gobi is one of great extremes, combined with rapid changes of temperature of as much as 35 degrees Celsius. These can occur not only seasonally but within 24 hours. In southern Mongolia, the temperature has been recorded as low as -32.8 degrees Celsius. In contrast, in Altai, Inner Mongolia, it rises as high as 37 degrees Celsius in July. Average winter minimums are a frigid -40 degrees Celsius, while summertime temperatures are warm to hot, with highs that range up to 50 degrees Celsius. Most of the precipitation falls during the summer. Although the southeast monsoons reach the southeast parts of the Gobi, the area throughout this region is generally characterized by extreme dryness, especially during the winter, when the Siberian anticyclone is at at its strongest, hence the icy sandstorms and snowstorms of spring and early summer plus early January. Conservation, ecology, and economy. The Gobi Desert is the source of many important fossil finds, including the first dinosaur eggs. Despite the harsh conditions, these deserts and the surrounding regions sustain many animals, including black-tailed gazelles, marbled polecats, wild Bactrian camels, Mongolian wild ass and sand plovers. They are occasionally visited by snow leopards, brown bears, and wolves. Drought-adapted shrubs in the desert included gray sparrows, saltwort, gray sagebrush, and low grasses such as needlegrass and bridlegrass. Several large nature reserves have been established in the Gobi, including Gobi Gurvan Zyakhan National Park, Great Gobi A and Great Gobi B strictly protected area. The area is vulnerable to trampling by livestock in off-road vehicles. In Mongolia, grasslands have been degraded by goats, which are raised by nomadic herders as source of cashmere wool. The economic trends of livestock privatization and the collapse of the urban economy have caused people to return to subsistence rural lifestyles, away from urbanization. Large copper and gold deposits located at Oyu-Tolgoi, about 80 kilometers from the Chinese border into Mongolia, are being investigated for development as mining operations. The Oyu-Tolgoi copper and gold mine, under construction by Rio Tinto in the South Gobi Desert, is expected to begin operation in early 2013, and is the biggest economic undertaking in the country's history. Rio Tinto estimates that taxes, royalties and dividends generated by the Oyu-Tolgoi project is expected to add a third to the country's gross domestic product by 2020. Rio Tinto forecasts average annual production of 450,000 tons of copper and 330,000 ounces of gold, and with 1.4 billion tons of reserves and a resource of 3.1 billion tons, the mine is expected to last for more than 50 years. The mine has been and remains controversial. There is significant opposition in Mongolia's parliament to the terms under which the mine will proceed, and some are calling for the terms to be renegotiated. Specifically, the contention revolves primarily around the question of whether negotiations were fair and whether Rio Tinto will pay adequate taxes on the revenues it derives from the mine. An agreement was reached whereby the operation will be exempt from windfall tax. Desertification. The Gobi Desert is expanding at an alarming rate in a process known as desertification. The expansion is particularly rapid on the southern edge into China, which has seen 3,600 square kilometers of grassland overtaken every year by the Gobi Desert. Dust storms, which used to occur regularly in China, have increased in frequency in the past 20 years, mainly due to desertification. They have caused further damage to China's agriculture economy. The expansion of the Gobi is attributed mostly to human activities, notably deforestation, overgrazing, and depletion of water resources. China has tried various plans to slow the expansion of the desert, which have met with some small degree of success but no major effects. The most recent plan involves the planting of the Green Wall of China, a huge ring of newly planted forests. The government hopes the forests will help stabilize the soil, retain moisture, and act as a buffer against further desertification. Ecoregions of the Gobi. The Gobi, broadly defined, can be divided into 5 distinct dry ecoregions based on variations in climate and topography. Eastern Gobi Desert Steppe, the easternmost of the Gobi ecoregions, covering an area of 281,800 square kilometers. It extends from the Inner Mongolian Plateau in China northward into Mongolia. It includes the Yin Mountains and many low-lying areas with salt pans and small ponds. It is bounded by the Mongolian-Manchurian grassland to the north, the Yellow River Plain to the southeast, and the Alashan Plateau semi-desert to the southeast and east. Alashan Plateau semi-desert lies west and southwest of the eastern Gobi Desert steppe. It consists of the desert basins and low mountains lying between the Gobi Altai Range on the north, the Altai Mountains to the southeast, and the Kilian Mountains and northeastern portion of the Tibetan Plateau on the southwest. Gobi Lakes Valley Desert Steppe ecoregion lies north of Alashan Plateau semi-desert, between the Gobi Altai Range to the south and the Khangai Mountains to the north. The Dzungarian Basin semi-desert includes the desert basin lying between the Altai Mountains on the north and the Tian Shan Range on the south. It includes the northern portion of China's Xinjiang province and extends into the southeastern corner of Mongolia. The Alashan Plateau semi-desert lies to the east, and the Eman Valley steppe to the west, on the China-Kazakhstan border. Tian Shan Range separates the Dzungarian Basin semi-desert from the Taklamakan Desert, which is a low, sandy desert basin surrounded by the high mountain ranges of the Tibetan Plateau to the south and the Pamirs to the west. The Taklamakan Desert ecoregion includes the desert of Asia.It. Eastern Gobi Desert steppe. The surface is extremely diversified, although there are no great differences in vertical elevation. Between Ulaanbaatar and the small lake of Asia.It, the surface is greatly eroded. Broad flat depressions and basins are separated by groups of flat-topped mountains of relatively low elevation 150 to 180 meters, through which archaic rocks crop out as crags and isolated rugged masses. The floors of the depressions lie mostly between 900 to 1,000 meters above sea level. Farther south, between Asia.It and Ushasuna and the Yellow River, comes a region of broad tablelands alternating with flat plains, the latter ranging at altitudes of 1,000 to 1,100 meters and the former at 1,070 to 1,200 meters. The slopes of the plateaus are more or less steep, and are sometimes penetrated by bays of the lowlands. As the border range of the Hyangan is approached, the country steadily rises up to 1,370 meters and then to 1,630 meters. Here small lakes frequently fill the depressions, though the water in them is generally salt or brackish. Both here and for 320 kilometers south of Ulaanbaatar, streams are frequent and grass grows more or less abundantly through all the central parts, until the bordering mountains are reached. Trees and shrubs are utterly absent. Clay and sand are the predominant formations, the watercourses, especially in the north, being frequently excavated 2 to 3 meters deep. In many places in the flat, dry valleys or depressions farther south, beds of loess 5 to 6 meters thick are exposed. West of the route from Ulaanbaatar to Kalgan, the country presents approximately the same general features, except that the mountains are not so irregularly scattered in groups but have more strongly defined strikes, mostly east to west, west-northwest to east-southeast, and west-southwest to east-northeast. The altitudes are higher, those of the lowlands ranging from 1,000 to 1,700 meters, and those of the ranges from 200 to 500 meters higher, though in a few cases they reach altitudes of 2,400 meters. The elevations do not form continuous chains, but make up a congeries of short ridges and groups rising from a common basin intersected by a labyrinth of ravines, gullies, glens and basins. But the tablelands built up of the horizontal red deposits of the Khangai, which are characteristic of the southern parts of eastern Mongolia, are absent here or occur only in one locality, near the Sharamuran River. They are greatly intersected by gullies or dry watercourses. Water is scarce, with no streams, no lakes, no wells, and precipitation falls seldom. The prevailing winds blow from the west and northwest, and the pall of dust overhangs the country as in the Taklamakan and the Desert of Lop. Characteristic of the flora are wild garlic, Caledium graciale, wormwood, saxaul, Nitraria scoberry, caragana ephedra, saltwort, and the grass Lasiagrostis splendens. The tana wild onion, Allium polarizum, is the main browse eaten by many herd animals, and Mongolians claim that this is essential to produce the correct, slightly hazelnut-like flavor of camel arag. This great desert country of Gobi is crossed by several trade routes, some of which have been in use for thousands of years. Among the most important are those from Kalgan to Ulaanbaatar, from Jiquan to Hami 670 kilometers, from Hami to Beijing, from Huo to Hami and Baikal, and from Lanzhou to Hami. Alashan Plateau semi-desert, the southwestern portion of the Gobi, known also as the Hexi and the Little Gobi, fills the space between the Great North Loop of the Yellow River on the east, the Ajin River on the west, and the Kilian Mountains and narrow rocky chain of Longshao, 3,200 to 3,500 meters in altitude, on the southwest. The Ordos Desert, which covers the northeastern portion of the Ordos Plateau, in the Great North Loop of the Yellow River, is part of this ecoregion. It belongs to the middle basin of the three great depressions into which Tibetan divides the Gobi as a whole. Topographically, says Nikolai Przewalski, it is a perfectly level plain, which in all probability once formed the bed of a huge lake or inland sea. Quote, he concludes this based on the level area of the region as a whole, the hard salginate clay and the sand-strewn surface, and, lastly, the salt lakes which occupy its lowest parts. For hundreds of kilometers, nothing can be seen but bare sands. In some places they continue so far without a break that the Mongols call them tenga. These vast expanses are absolutely waterless, nor do any oases relieve the unbroken stretches of yellow sand, which alternate with the equally vast areas of saline clay or, nearer the foot of the mountains, with barren shingle. Although on the whole a level country with a general altitude of 1,000 to 1,500 meters, this section, like most other parts of the Gobi, is crowned by a checkered network of hills and broken ranges going up 300 meters higher. The vegetation is confined to a few varieties of bushes and a dozen kinds of grasses and herbs, the most conspicuous being saxaul and Agriophyllum gobicum. The others include prickly convolvulus, field wormwood, acacia, Anula amorphylla, Sophora flavescens, convolvulus ammoni, pagonim, and astragalus, but all dwarfed, deformed and starved. The fauna consists of little-bird antelope, wolf, fox, hare, hedgehog, marten, numerous lizards and a few birds, e.g., the sand grouse, lark, stonechat, sparrow, crane, Henderson's ground jay, horned lark, and crested lark. The Zungarian Basin semi-desert. The structure here is that of the mighty Tian Shan, or Heavenly Mountains, running from west to east. It divides the northern one-third of Xinjiang from the southern two-thirds. On the northern side, rivers formed from the snow and glaciers of the high mountains break through barren foothill ranges and flow out into an immense, hollow plain. Here the rivers begin to straggle and fan out, and form great marshes with dense reed beds. Westerners call this terrain the Dzungarian Desert. The Chinese also call it a desert, but the Mongols call it a Gobi, that is, a land of thin herbage, more suitable for camels than for cows, but capable also, if herds are kept small and moved frequently, of sustaining horses, sheep, and goats. The herbage comprises a high proportion of woody, fragrant plants. Gobi mutton is the most aromatic in the world. The Yildiz Valley, a valley of the Haidag-Gol, is a mini-desert enclosed by two prominent members of the Shanosh and Tranosh mountain range, namely the Tusi and the Kusanad pine valleys, running perpendicular and far from one another. As they proceed south, they transcend and transpose, sweeping back on east and west respectively, with Lake Boston in between. These two ranges mark the northern and the southern edges respectively of a great swelling, which extends eastward for nearly 20 degrees of longitude. On its northern side, the Altai descends steeply, and its foot is fringed by a string of deep depressions, ranging from Lukchen below sea level to Hami above sea level. To the south of the Kurukta lie the desert of Lopenua, the Kumta Desert, and the valley of the Bulundzirgol. To this great swelling, which arches up between the two border ranges of the Altai and Kurukta, the Mongols give the name of Gashuan Gobi, or Salt Desert. It is some 130 to 160 kilometers across from north to south, and is traversed by a number of minor parallel ranges, ridges and chains of hills. Down its middle runs a broad stony valley, 40 to 80 kilometers wide, at an elevation of 900 to 1,370 meters. The Altai, which reaches an average altitude of 1,800 meters, is absolutely sterile, and its northern foot rests upon a narrow belt of barren sand, which leads down to the depressions mentioned above. The Kurukta is the greatly disintegrated, denuded and wasted relic of a mountain range which used to be of incomparably greater magnitude. In the west, between Lake Boston and the Tarim, it consists of two, possibly of three, principal ranges, which, although broken in continuity, run generally parallel to one another, and embrace between them numerous minor chains of heights. These minor ranges, together with the principal ranges, divide the region into a series of long, narrow valleys, mostly parallel to one another and to the enclosing mountain chains, which descend like terrace steps, on the one side towards the depression of Lukchen and on the other towards the desert of Lop. In many cases these latitudinal valleys are barred transversely by ridges or spurs, generally elevations en masse of the bottom of the valley. Where such elevations exist, there is generally found, on the east side of the transverse ridge, a cauldron-shaped depression, which some time or other has been the bottom of a former lake, but is now nearly a dry salt basin. The surface configuration is in fact markedly similar to that which occurs in the intermount latitudinal valleys of the Kunlun Mountains. The hydrography of the Gashian Gobi and the Kurukta is determined by these checkered arrangements of the latitudinal valleys. Most of the principal streams, instead of flowing straight down these valleys, cross them diagonally and only turn west after they have cut the way through one or more of the transverse barrier ranges. To the highest range on the great swelling Grumgraji Milo gives the name of Tushtau, its altitude being 2,700 meters above the level of the sea and some 1,200 meters above the crown of the swelling itself. This range he considers to belong to the Kolta system, whereas Sven Hedden would assign it to the Kurukta. This last, which is pretty certainly identical with the range of Karatek in Ula that overlooks the southern shore of the Lake Boston, though parted from it by the drift sand desert of Akbelkum, has at first a west-northwest to east-southeast stripe, but it gradually curves round like a scimitar towards the east-northeast and at the same time gradually decreases in elevation, in 91 degrees east, while the principal range of the Kurukta system wheels to the east-northeast. Four of its subsidiary ranges terminate or rather die away somewhat suddenly, on the brink of a long narrow depression, having over against them the echelon terminals of similar subordinate ranges of the Pishan system. The Kurukta is throughout a relatively low, but almost completely barren range, being entirely destitute of animal life, save for hares, antelopes and wild camels, which frequent its few small, widely scattered oases. The vegetation, which is confined to these same relatively favored spots, is of the scantiest and is mainly confined to bushes of Saxal, Anabasis, reeds, tamarisks, poplars, and a Fedra-European exploration up to 1911. The Gobi had a long history of human habitation, mostly by nomadic peoples. By the early 20th century the region was under the nominal control of Manchu China, and inhabited mostly by Mongols, Uyghurs, and Kazakhs. The Gobi Desert as a whole was only very imperfectly known to outsiders, information being confined to observations by individual travelers from the respective itineraries across the desert. Among the European explorers who contributed to early 20th century understanding of the Gobi, the most important were Jean-François Gerbillon, Eberhardus Brandeis, the Renz Longy, Fussen Alexander G. von Bunge, Hermann Fritzsche, Pavlinov and Z. L. Machasovsky, Neelias, Nikolai Przewalski, Sosnovsky, Mikhail V. Pevsov, Grigory Potanin, Count Beakut-La Seshany and Lajos Lugzi. The brothers G. E. Grumgrashimilo and Grumgrashimilo, Pyot Yakozmij Kozlov, V. Vsevolod I, Robrovsky, Vladimir Obrushev, Karl Joseph Futter and Dr. Holderer, Charles Etienne Bonin, Sven Hedden, K. Bogdanovich, Ladykin and Katsnikov.